Gloomy autumn in Saint Petersburg. The sky is covered with leaden clouds. The dampness bites into the bones, and the wind carries a mournful melody through the streets. It's already twilight. The streetlights are lit, illuminating the chilly sidewalks and shiny puddles. I was walking down the street, lost in thought. They were as hazy as the weather. I was thinking about life, the inevitability of time, that everything we see today may disappear tomorrow under the veil of the past. Sense of the day's concerns flashed in my memory, which seemed so important in the morning, but with each hour lost their sharpness. Suddenly in the distance, I noticed her. A shadow. It glided across the pavement like a ghost lurking in the gloom. Its movements were slow and hurried, as if it was not in a hurry, but savoring its approach. In the dim light of the street lamps, the figure seemed an indistinct outline, blurred and threatening. Its silhouette was vague, like some unspoken fears that had lurked in the night. Each step of this black figure sent a chilling horror through my soul, as if the very air was imbued with a shadow, robbing the world of its life, as if some merciless predator was slowly approaching its prey, and the shadow was its cold omen. And just as the shadow was almost upon me, the air became cooler. At first, it was a barely noticeable breeze, as if from a frozen lake, but it grew stronger. And at that moment, I noticed that the first snowflakes began to swirl over the pavement, illuminated by the pale light of the street lamps. They were small, like fuzzy down, and fell slowly, as if tasting the ground, whether it was ready to accept their cold touch. And the shadow, as if sensing the approach of the snow, quickened its pace. Now it was clear that it was not just a ghost, but a real donkey. A donkey with dark fur, laden with sacks that swayed with each step. It was simply enormous, as if created from the night darkness. The donkey walked with a firm gait, and the way it moved its legs made it clear that it was not going anywhere, but going somewhere with purpose. That's how the donkey walked on his business, like a man. It held its head high, swaying from the weights of the sacks, but its gait had a certain grace, unusual for ordinary animals. It stopped on the bridge, looked around, and as if making a decision, continued on its way. I saw how it stepped over the wet cobblestones, how it carefully avoided the puddles, how it stopped at streetlight to better examine something in the shadows. And then I understood. This was no ordinary donkey. This was the devil, in a donkey's skin. It had taken on the form of an animal to hide its true nature. It was going about its business like a man, but its eyes were not looking at its life, but at another, at death, at the abyss. It was here, in our world, but not of it. It was a guest who didn't want to leave, who wanted to stay and watch how we live, how we die. The donkey approached me, his hoofs leaving prints in the soft snow. Each step was decisive and sounded like the beats of a heavy heart. Its red eyes, glowing like embers in the darkness, its gaze was directed at me, trembled like the lights of a lighthouse guiding a ship to the edge of the world. This red light burned not only in its eyes, but around it, as if it surrounded with a relentless fiery hoop. It seemed to me that time stood still at that moment. I could not move. I could not avert my gaze. In my heart, the bell told a warning, but I could not understand what to do. The devil was near. His presence was felt so distantly that it seemed as if the whole world had shrunk to this ominous encounter. He came so close that I could see every wrinkle on his muzzle, every fire on his crumbling skin. In his eyes now smoldered an unspeakable thirst, calling me to the unknown, the dangerous. I felt that my fate hung by a thread, that any wrong move could be the last. The donkey stopped a few steps from me, its red eyes like two burning stars piercing me through. The silence was so thick that it seemed as if the very air had thickened from his presence.
You saw?
His voice was hoarse, like the creaking of an old, rusty door.
You know what it truly means to be terrified.
Gripped by horror, I could not utter a word. My legs seemed rooted to the ground, and confused thoughts whirled in my head.
You saw what is hidden beneath the mask of the world,
he continued.
You saw the darkness that lurks in the hearts of men. You know that in this world there's nothing good, nothing pure. You know.
He fell silent, his gaze becoming even more piercing, as if he was trying to look into the very heart of my soul.
You know that you will never be able to forget this,
he whispered, and his voice was quiet, but full of threat.
You know the truth, and the truth is terrible, always terrible.
He took a step forward, and I felt the cold seep under my skin. I wanted to scream, but no sound came from my lips.
And therefore, you'll never be happy.
He smiled, and the smile was horrific, ominous, like the smell of a dead man.
You'll forever live with this truth. You'll forever remember what you have seen.
He fell silent again, and I could not only hear the pounding of my heart in my ears.
Now go,
he said softly, but his voice was filled with iron determination.
And tell no one that you have seen. Do not try to forget the truth. It will remain with you forever.
I could not whisper a word, as if my tongue had turned to stone from terror. The donkey did not take his red eyes off me, as if penetrating the depths of my soul. He stood that way for a few more seconds, then turned and, staggering, continued on his way into the darkness. I was still rooted to the spot when the donkey, already almost disappeared in the fog, suddenly stopped. He turned to me, his red eyes piercing my soul, and hoarse whispers kept his mouth.
Go, but don't forget everything you have seen. And remember one thing, not all that glitters is gold.
In the next moment, a bag fell at my feet. Heavy, leather. It fell with a dull thud, scattering a few shiny coins across the pavement. The donkey turned again and disappeared into the night gloom, as if dissolved. I stood, stunned, and watched as the city lights were reflected in the coins scattered across the pavement. What was this? What kind of game? I slowly bent down to pick up the bag, when suddenly the ground beneath my feet shook. I felt a sharp gust of wind, and the world around me darkened. I found myself in a tunnel. It was dark, damp, and smelt of moisture. At the end of it shone a red light like the fires of hell. The bag I held in my hands was inexorably pulling me forward, blocking the reddish light. I tried to let go of it, but my hands did not obey my control. I was hostage of Donkey's curse. And at that moment, I realized that the appearance of the donkey was not just a mirage. It was a warning that not all the glitters is gold, and that some roads leads only to the abyss. I was flying into the darkness, into the hellfire, and all I had left was a prayer for forgiveness. For forgiveness for what I had seen, for what I knew, for what I could not forget. I regained consciousness. lying at the base of a streetlight illuminating the wet pavement. My head was pounding, and there was a strange emptiness in my body. Fragments of dreams and nightmarish visions were jumbled in my memory. Red eyes, a hoarse voice, a heavy back, and threatening words. I got to my feet, my body trembling like an aspen leaf in the wind. I looked around, but the donkey was nowhere to be seen. Only the imprints of its hooves on the wet asphalt reminded me of the monstrous encounter. I went home, my legs leading me automatically, as if I were a puppet in the hands of an unknown force. In the apartment, I sank into the deep sadness. Everything I had seen, everything I had heard, seemed unreal, but at the same time deeply rooted in my soul. I realized that the world I knew was just an illusion. I became different. I stopped believing in beauty, in goodness, in love. A cold was born in my heart that nothing could melt. I could no longer enjoy simple things, could not save a life. I always felt that the donkey was watching me, that it was always nearby, ready at any moment to remind me of the truth, that we are all doomed. And so, I became reckless. I renounced the world, people, and myself. I did not try to forget what I had seen. I just lived with this truth. And my life changed. It became empty, colorless, cold. But it also became free. Free from illusions, from hope, from love. I live in a world where there is nothing good, but I'm not afraid. I looked the truth in the eye and accepted it. And this makes me free.